somewhere I read, my mind crossed to something having to do, you know, this is about, for example, food production and food distribution, what kind of food, you know, that we consume too much meat, for example, and that the diet could be altered in a way which would be environmentally more friendly, right? Great idea. And of course, this college is part of it, tremendous romanticism of homegrown, you know, every time I go to a restaurant and I see, what is it, free range, free range something or other.
It does give a great, wonderful sense.
Yes.
This chicken just sort
that
of
chicken flying about,
gambling around,
which I'm just eating, you know, and and I have a different view of it because he or she, whatever the gender of the chicken is, enjoyed freedom, that the loss of life is more morally problematic, you know. So, you know, I'm not sure this is a good thing. But anyway, so there was something, I didn't quite get this right, but you'll help me out because it was in your newspaper. There was something about a free-range pig and with trichinosis. Did you follow this? You know, the revival of trichinosis. Now, we grew up with a sense of progress, and that's what has to be instilled, and that progress isn't hostile. That pasteurized milk isn't bad for you, that there's so much pseudo-nonsense out there about what is right, that, and people are unwilling actually to study enough of the science and the analytical claims to really inform them citizens. So they're susceptible to a lot of fairy tale stuff about.
This is a very important.
And this is ludicrous, and our schools are not doing it. It's not moral values, it's actually knowing something about biology, about meteorology, about physics. And let me tell you, running a college, which only the minority of the students are primarily scientists, those minority students know a lot more about Shakespeare, beauty, the history of Afghanistan than the people who are not scientists know about basic ABC biology. They don't know what a stem cell is. They don't know enough for them to exercise their proper obligation as a citizen, and they don't want to learn because it's too hard. And it's so poorly taught, it's murdered by its own defenders. It's not their fault. And unless we solve the fundamental educational problem so that the citizen is equipped to actually judge what the hell is going on here, we're in trouble.
Well, I mean, Andy, you're as a journalist whose job it is to sort of talk to the unequipped citizen and perhaps the equipped citizen. What do you realistically expect to be able to communicate about science to your readers?
Well, first of all, there are big questions about how much of what I do will be around in a few years. The media are going through.
Well, the blog will always be there.
Well, yeah.
That's right.
Sort of.
As long as you can make money.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the question. As long as you can make money on the free internet where everything is free, that makes it challenging. But no, in fact, lately when I've been speaking about my sense of where journalism is headed, and there's some expectation that, well, as Al Gore and others have said recently, it's our fault, the media's fault that everyone got global warming wrong and went to sleep. I dispute that. But even with that, the media that we know is not the media that we'll know in literally 5 years. Newspapers are blinking out like this right now. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer, there are 160 people in the newsroom, now 20. They went from print to online, and that's what happened. And science journalism is imploding as well. We've been retiring and sort of shrinking our staff. We've grown our coverage of the environment this past 6 months. We have a new set of people, and more of the science coverage we do is health, kind of the news you can use kind of stuff, and less of the rigorous science. And of course, my wife has been a science teacher for about 20 years at middle school age. And there, too, you see the lack of rigor and the sense that you're just teaching kids this rote sense of get some facts into your head and move on. That tendency to teach science that way is the most dangerous thing, because that doesn't allow you to discriminate, to remind yourself what science is. And science is a process. It's a journey toward the general direction of understanding, with a very clear sense that at any one moment you don't really understand a lot. And this gets back to what was said before about the importance of understanding uncertainty as much as we understand the things we think we know. So those skills, if there's a way to build that from an early age, a critical thinking and just process, problem-solving critical thinking, and then at the level of the college to start to really challenge people, to get people to think about genetically modified food or organisms. Is that a route forward for if we have Africa becoming more desertified, and if we're not thinking about salt-tolerant crops and drought-tolerant crops, there are plenty of people I know who just scratch that off. You know, GMOs are a non-starter, and if you're not listening to the arguments of people who say that's a dangerous thought, then you're probably missing something. If there are these reflexive, boxed attitudes are important to overcome. Nuclear power, you know, I live right near Indian Point, so we have lots of questions about nuclear power. But if people aren't willing to look at a world without it and say, so how do we fill that gap, the 20% we now generate with nuclear power? Many plants are going to be getting too old to run, so we need new ones anyway. So how do you fill that? So it's fine to say that's off the list, but then what's on the list? And if people don't have that sense of...
And assessing what is really the problem with nuclear power, I mean, apart from the security issues, but from the environmental issue, right? Mm-hmm. What is the problem with genetically, in other words, you know, it is, you know, what is the difference between what is natural? You know, I had an encounter recently because one of my children, who is an adult, was taking an antibiotic, actually penicillin, and we were at a person's house and they offered her some alcohol, you know, that old saw that you don't drink alcohol with, because it was once natural. What does it mean? It was really, the alcohol could have interrupted the function, but not with modern antibiotics, which are not developed that way. So there's a hypocrisy about where we draw the line about what we'll take from human ingenuity and what we define as natural. So the, you know, it's the level of analytical understanding and of, so what's the problem with nuclear power generation? You know, what are the possibilities? Why not work on it as a problem? Because if we know what the problems are, you're absolutely right, science is a process. And it's a process by which we say, okay, we got this right, but we have this wrong, we can't figure that out. Maybe there's a way to solve it. And the belief in that possibility, in that ingenuity, is absent because there's too little understanding.
Well, I want
to get back to the communication thing in a second.
Oh, yeah, go ahead and finish that up.
Yeah, because I didn't finish my vision of where we're headed. We're headed to the reason that it's so important that the things that Pam and BCEP are working on move ahead to make scientists more, I don't mean literate, but able to communicate effectively, interface with the world, tell the world what they're doing and why it matters, and which is different than saying what to do. Telling the world what they're doing and why it matters is different than being an advocate. But if they're not doing that, with a shrinking pool of people like me, if society doesn't fill some of that role, the interstitial role of taking you from the data to the decision, then we're in trouble. And my prediction is for journalism more outside just the realm of science and the environment. We're heading toward a world where it's much more of a cloud of information funneling through places like the New York Times, which is going to be around for another 100 years, I'm sure, just greatly shrunken. Still really smart, a lot of great people, and some investigative reporters, some feature writers and all that stuff, but much smaller, but then with much bigger funnels